Welcome back to the Sampan Viking on China channel. Uh, there are a number of subjects that are quite worthy of quite detailed discussion at the moment, and it's actually quite difficult to see where to begin. And so, what I've been doing over the last few days is to see what is the link between these, because obviously there is something. And I think it can be summed up in a very simple phrase. We have this global strategic rebalancing of the geopolitical chessboard. Um, and so what we are seeing are the almost unseen but quite deep seismic movements of the superpowers as they readjust to the new realignment of power, which everybody's now realizing is the case and can no longer resist. That being said, and whilst this lines up and certainly makes a lot of subjects easier to approach in a sequential and logical way, I think for the time being, for this conversation, I'm going to continue with the subject of Taiwan. And I'm going to be speaking about really what a Chinese takeover of Taiwan would really look like. There's been a lot of speculation about this, and I think a lot of it is overblown and scaremongering and all the rest of it. I think the reality of the world that now exists means that the sort of steps that I'm going to discuss are the kind of thing that you might expect to see, or things of a similar ilk that look to achieve a similar result. I think the first thing to say is that, of course, if you listen to the Western media, an invasion of Taiwan, China invading itself, would be this full frontal assault, no holes barred, a bit like the US does, really, shock and awe strike against the island in which everything is flattened, destroyed, and the people's liberation flag is raised amid the smoking ruins. Well, this is very much a Hollywood version, and when you hear anything that sounds like Hollywood, it's an American invention and can usually be discounted. I think that the reality of the Chinese takeover of Taiwan, the Chinese reintegration of Taiwan, the People's Republic reunification with the Republic of China into one single China again, is something going to be far more nuanced and far more rooted in culture and law. And although with a cutting edge employed, which obviously has to be. And I'm going to start off really by saying, we have an example of this that we can look at straight away, and that is Afghanistan. Had you believed the Western media, Afghanistan would have been a bloodbath in which the Taliban had had to fight tooth and nail for every inch of the country. In reality, nothing could have been further from the truth. Sick and tired, I think, of the invader occupiers, sick and tired of their puppet installed regime. They were prepared to give, the people of Afghanistan were prepared to give the Taliban the doubt, and the Taliban were able to occupy the country with scarce a shot being fired. It was largely a bloodless takeover. One or two obviously hotspots needed some pacifying, but overall they were welcomed as liberators rather than as a hostile takeover. And I believe that at the end of the day, much of Taiwan would fall in the same or similar way. The thing to remember, of course, on the island of Taiwan, inside the Republic of China, is that you do have obviously the ideological constituencies either side. You have the strong reunificationists, you have the strong pro-independence forces, but sitting in the middle are a huge number of weathercocks. And these are people that simply turn to where the prevailing geopolitical wind is coming from, where the perceived power and advantage is appreciated as residing. And these are the people that the PRC will need to convince that they need to align with them. And once they do that, believe you me, the vast majority of them will. This is what weathercocks do. They just want a quiet life. At the end of the day, you've got to pay taxes. Who do you pay your taxes to? Well, it doesn't really matter as long as they can deliver a decent service and leave you alone to enjoy your quiet life. So very few people, ideology is something that gets spouted on the newspapers, on the TV. It doesn't really intervene into their daily lives, and if it does, it's not usually wanted. So, how would China look to reintegrate Taiwan um, without launching a full all-out assault? I did touch on this in the last video, and so I'm quite happy to revisit some of these areas and expand on it a little bit. And again, I think the first core of it is to appreciate that there is one China, and that just as we saw in Hong Kong, the government in Beijing, which is the official government of China, has rights from that position, and it can choose to exercise those rights, and it doesn't necessarily infringe on the on the activities on the island itself and its self-governing activities necessarily. And the first thing I can see it would do would be to implement a national security law. And this is only fair and right. There is only one China, and this is to ensure the territorial integrity and security of the entire Chinese state, both governments within it. It would be undoubtedly reviled by the West as they did in Hong Kong. The pro-independents would wail and tear their beards, but many on the island, I think, would be relieved to have such a thing because it would be an indication that reunification was going to be a largely peaceful affair. The next step, I think, in which the kind of thing that they could do would be to form a sort of trade embargo against the island. But that doesn't mean just to blockade everything, but simply to say that the trade from the island can't leave its ports for market directly. It has to go via the mainland, and to enforce that with a naval blockade to stop ships coming in directly from outside into Taiwanese ports. That would be useful, certainly when it comes to the chips. It would mean China would access chips that maybe otherwise would be denied it, and it would put again a strong hold on something that the West values. This would be a signal to the weathercocks on Taiwan as to which way the wind is blowing, because unless there was a massive military intervention at that point by the US, in which case all bets are off and everything, there would be widespread destruction, they would simply say, well, nobody's going to come to help us, which I believe is the case. Nobody is going to come to help them. Lots of verbiage, lots of strong language, all from a safe distance, no actual kinetic activity around the island to change the situation. So they would see that it is going to be the case. Next step up from that, I think, would be something like a no-fly zone, which means that the Taiwanese Air Force would be ordered to stay on the ground. This again is something that we've seen implemented against other nations by the West. Why shouldn't China implement that against what it sees as a breakaway province? And in fact, knowing that there is a high degree of loyalism within the Taiwanese military forces, it would be, I think, taken as a relief by many of their senior officers that their men and aircraft aren't going to be put into risk unnecessarily by reckless, DPP politicians who are happy to fight to the last Taiwanese servicemen in order to burnish their political credentials. So that would be, I think, that would be, I think, a fairly important step in the process. Follow on from that, then you establish a total exclusion zone for all, foreign shipping and aircraft around the island out to whatever distance. That would be and you can probably extend that on the entire Chinese seaboard, which again would send a message that Taiwan is part of China and that all Chinese territory cannot now be approached at this time. Finally, I think when the final, if it does turn to military means at the end, I think there would be a great reluctance to unnecessarily engage with Taiwanese military forces, and I think the information would be put out that if Taiwanese military assemble at various locations, arrange themselves, deploy on those bases in a non-aggressive way, i.e., line up their equipment on the fields and sort of sit in their barracks, that they will be safe, that these will be safe zones and they won't be attacked. And I think a large part, again, of the KMT will simply do that to not hinder the PLA forces from landing and taking control of the island. Because at the end of the day, the Taiwanese military, the KMT, is very is the most pro reunification force probably on the island, and will be only too happy to be able to achieve reunification without having to fight against, without having to fight the last battle of the Civil War, which would be very, very costly. That is, I think, a rundown of how I see it would happen. It also means that I can now move away from the Taiwanese question and start to look at some of the other things going on, which are all relating to the strategic rebalancing that's happening between the superpowers. And these issues will be the things that I look at and discuss in forthcoming videos over the next few weeks. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed and can follow the logic of my arguments. If you've liked, please tick like. If you don't subscribe, please do. It's free and it helps this channel to grow. If you would like other people to listen to what I have to say, please hit the share button. And if you would like to make a comment or ask a question, please leave a comment and I will reply as and when I can, where appropriate. Thank you very much, and until the next video, I will look forward to seeing you then.